February 7th, 2014. Our aim today will be how did industrialization and urbanization have both a positive and negative effect on American society? So for your do now, I want you guys to think about the city in which you live. What are some things you like about living in the city? What are some things you dislike? And just have an idea of that as we move along. So today, like I said, we are going to be talking about American society and how it adjusted to industrialization. And we're going to be looking at the effects of urbanization and industrialization. From the slide, you see there was much more than just the positive effects of these things, but also the negative effects. And we're going to focus on both of them today. So first off, let's start off by analyzing urbanization and industrialization and what they mean. Industrialization is the concept of the rise of factories and also the rise of machines. And when we talk about industrialization, as you learned last year in Ms. BP or Mr. Luna's class, industrialization, the rise of factories, is going to lead to more jobs and more workers. When those jobs and workers come to the cities, so do more people living in the city. And that's going to bring about urbanization. Urbanization is going to be the concept of the rise of cities. Simply put, the building of cities. And within those cities, as we're going to see on our field trip, tenement housing. What are the positives, or if there are any positives of tenement housing, and obviously what are the negatives? All of this is brought about by industrialization. So during class, we're going to take a break and we're going to discuss this point right here. Industrialization and urbanization are sometimes referred to as a gift and a curse. Why do you think that is? Explain using examples. So in other words, how are industrialization and urbanization looked at, both positively and negatively? So we'll start by talking about urbanization, and we'll focus on the positives at first. You're going to have the rise of new technologies. And when you think about city living, the first thing you need to think about is transportation. How are people going to get from point A to point B? And at the turn of the century, you have the development of things such as subways, elevated cars, and streetcars. All of those were methods of mass transportation, whereas people were able to get from one point to another relatively simple and also with less traffic. And I want you guys, if you don't understand that concept, to think about what the city would look like today if there were no subways and if there were no buses. Second technology we're going to think about is elevators. And what did elevators promote? And if we think about the amount of people coming into the city, they're not going to have the room to expand horizontally. So how do they start building buildings? They build upwards. And when you are on the 10th floor of a building, you are not going to want to walk up 10 floors every day. That is going to be why the need for elevators is pretty necessary. You're going to have the development of gas and electric lights, so you're going to have some sort of visibility to the city even at nighttime, and water sewage systems, which are going to be a slow process in getting put into the cities, but very important for health reasons. If you think about why water and sewage systems are so important, you need clean running water every day, and you also need sewage systems to get rid of the water that you don't want. Cultural advances, you're going to start to have the building of museums, concert halls, theaters, parks, and you're going to have quality public school education. When we talk about the museums, concert halls, theaters, and parks, think about people who donated millions of dollars, the people we learned about, the robber barons / philanthropists, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, and how these guys were taking everybody's money on one side, and on the other end, they're putting in all this money to all these charitable things. Quality public school education, they're going to start to have education for all students. And it wasn't based on wealth, it was based on the fact that you were required to go to school. And that's going to start in the cities. And with any city, obviously one of the most, if not the most important thing, is your police force, your fire departments, and your hospitals. All right, the community improvements you need to keep everything running. So what are some of the negatives of urbanization? And if we look at this picture on the right away we can see that this was not a very enjoyable living experience. And from our field trip, you guys will see or have seen the problems associated with tenement living. And tenement housing, in terms of description, we're talking about the negatives of urbanization now. It was a crowded building in which multiple families lived in one room. All right? Whole neighborhoods became slums, and with that became crime. One of the things, when you think about poverty, what leads to poverty? What comes from poverty? Crime. People needing their basic things in life. They need to get them somehow, so they resort to crime. In terms of health, you have inadequate, poor water and sanitation, which are going to spread disease, and that's why in the slide before we talked about the need for sewage systems and water systems. And the poor families did not have proper diets. When we talk about politics, corruption, public money ended up in the pockets of corrupt politicians. A problem that still happens today, guys, but was even much more prevalent back then, was this idea of corruption. Even the people who pay their taxes, their money didn't go towards public needs. All right, a lot of it ended up in politicians' pockets, which is a sad thing. So overall, after we talked about the negatives and the positives of urbanization, do you view urbanization as a positive or negative? And I want you to talk about why. Provide specific details in your argument. The evolution of the class system is going to be a very important part of what happens because of urbanization and industrialization. You're going to have a huge working/poor class. That's going to take up about 92 to 95% of the people who lived in the city. All right, it was the largest group. It was mostly immigrants who lived in the slums, who lived in these tenement houses. All right, you had the middle class. They lived in better maintained housing. It was people such as doctors, lawyers, and skilled workers. And this increases as the Industrial Revolution increases, and you have a need for skilled workers, doctors, lawyers, etc. And a very small percentage of the population was the wealthy or upper class. Entrepreneurs, wealthy business people, they were, like I said, a very small percentage. However, when you look at America at the turn of the 20th century, so about 1900, you had 10% of the population who controlled 90% of the wealth. And I want you guys to think about that for a second and kind of grasp the idea that 90% of our country's money was in the hands of 10% of its people. And the picture on the side here shows you, a normal scene for working/poor class people outside their houses or their tenements. So a talking point to think of here is, and we're going to discuss this in class, so be prepared, why is the evolution of the class system a problem which has continued to plague the United States and many countries? Explain using as much detail as possible. So in simpler terms, how has the class system caused problems in the United States? Our check for understanding today is a multiple choice question from the Regents. Which factor contributed the most to urbanization in the late 1800s? And your choices are A, assimilation, B, industrialization, C, imperialism, or D, nullification. We will talk about the answer in class, but I want you guys to come with something prepared. Our assignment today, which you will do in class, it's an in-class assignment, is worksheet 4.11 or 4.11. Industrialization and urbanization had both positive and negative effects on society in the late 1800s and still do today. Your task is to write a paragraph explaining the positive and negative effects of industrialization on American society. Be sure to use examples explaining each effect. Your second task is writing a paragraph comparing the positive and negative effects of industrialization and urbanization to today's urban life in 2012. What problems have remained in cities today that were also present in the late 1800s? What new problems exist? How has society today improved because of industrialization? How has it gotten worse because of industrialization? Be sure to use examples to prove your points. So be prepared to answer all those talking points in class, and we will come back to that during our lecture.